I developed it myself. Yes, sirree, this is my ticket upstairs. You know, for kids.
Sit back in your seats, get something to eat, and watch this movie. Don't let the kiddies see it, because, well, we'll let you hear the beginning first. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Left of the Projector. I am Evan and I'm here to discuss this week's movie, The Hudsucker Proxy. I'm joined by Cole, who will be chatting with me about the movie, which came out in 1994. It was directed and produced by Joel and Ethan Cohen. Sam Raimi also helped write the script and served as one of the co-directors. The stars and main characters from this movie are Tim Robbins, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and Paul Newman. It is didn't do too well in the theaters, but kind of looking back on it, the movie does hold up over time. So thanks for joining me, Cole.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, yeah. So as far as the movie goes, I've been asking this general question. How do you think the movie holds up? You know, it's now been about almost 30 years since it came out in 94. So in that time, do you think it stands today?
You know, I've always liked this movie. And when I recommended it to you, it's been probably a good 5 or 6 years since I've seen it. And I just rewatched it and I think it holds up. There's a lot of themes that are very pertinent to today.
Yeah, I think so too. And this was the first time I'd seen the movie, which may be surprising, being that I think I've seen all the other Cohen Brothers movies. And it definitely has a different vibe, I think, than their other movies. It's maybe being one of their early ones. Maybe that's to be expected. And one thing I didn't realize is that they actually wrote this script back in the mid-'80s, which in some ways almost makes more sense when we get into some of the plot and the ideas behind business and the whole kind of corporate structure in New York City. So do you think that hearing that, do you think that changes your thoughts or maybe reinforces your thoughts on the movie?
No, I think you're on the money there. Definitely throughout the 80s, there's a lot going on. So yeah, I think it holds up, but we can discuss it and see where it goes.
Yeah. So as far as just kind of sketching out the general kind of plot of the movie, basically it takes place, the very first scene of the movie is New Year's Eve, 1958 into 1959 in New York City. We have Norville, which is Tim Robbins' character, appearing to scale out on a building, potentially, looking to jump. And then we get a flashback a month earlier as a Norville character just has finished school and he's in New York City looking for a job, but he can't seem to find anything. And one of the very first scenes in the movie, when it goes back to the start, a month before New Year's Eve, we see him, at a kind of a job board, almost like a ticker for a train station. And I found that whole interesting and seeing all of the jobs saying that you have to have experience. And it made me think about today where it's hard to get a job without experience, especially in the more corporate world when you're someone new out of college. So I don't know how you thought that opening scene worked.
Man, that ticker scene was very interesting. Like, I guess now, nowadays everything's all Indeed or resumes, but really nothing's changed. It's all about the same. And then he was noticing like everything he had to have experience, like 5 years experience. It's very much the same as what people are dealing with today.
Yeah, especially now as, you're encouraged to go to school and college and incur, debt to do so. And you're going to be promised this great job after. And then you get out of college with all this debt and you can't find a job because they require more experience. And you wonder why. What did you do wrong?
Right. And when he gets off the bus from Muncie, you can just feel that he's so full of hope. Like, yes, this is going to work out for me. But then the realization kicks in. And then that's when I don't know how you want to go, but that's when we kind of meet him in the coffee shop when he's looking at the newspaper ads, which is kind of similar, but like it was more, personal, more like reflecting like, hey, maybe this wasn't the best idea. Maybe I didn't need to incur all of this student debt, which I feel like a lot of people nowadays are like, man, I just went to school for 8 years. Not sure if I can find a job in this field.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and then I think that coffee shop, I think, plays later again. You see it, kind of recurring spots that he's going to, but it was like he didn't have very much money. He's putting the change down for his coffee and he takes them back because he can barely afford it. But then kind of, I feel like in a movie, very Cohen Brothers type scene where he had the mug on the paper where there's an offer for a job at Hudsucker Industries. So you see him wandering the streets. He's now the opposite. Now he's kind of discouraged. He couldn't find a job. He's down on his luck. And then we kind of flash over to this corporate board scene at the Hudsucker Corporation building, which, the first thing that I noticed, one is that it's a bunch of old white men along this long board table. And they're kind of discussing one guy is discussing all the great things that are doing and all the things that are happening. And the one line that I wrote down was, yep, and we're loaded. So they're not doing bad. And then the head of the company, Mr. Hudsucker, gets up and you think he's going to give like a big, speech or something. And then all the great thing that's happening. And the thing you see him do is he gets up on the table and he jumps out the window. So
yeah. And this is all within the first probably 10 minutes of the film.
Yep.
It's a telling look into venture capitalism and how it's failing people. Not only, and they're successful businessmen, obviously, but their mental health is affected by this.
What made me think of, too, was I think that, just generally in the last 20, 30 years, people who work in finance tend to be very overworked and highly stressed. And I think there is a very high suicide rate or, just mental health issues that you get from that strain on your body to be in Wall Street or whatever. This isn't Wall Street, but I think the same thing plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the theme. That's what I took away from it too. But yeah, you see warring Hudsucker jump out the window, and right away, like immediately after, they're talking about how they can spin it, how they can, use this moment to short stock or sell their stock short and make money off the situation.
Exactly. They want to turn, just like any big business now, they want to turn a tragedy, even for themselves or for people or for whoever, and turn it around so they can benefit off of it.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and so the kind of the next point before we kind of introduce Norville back into the movie is now they're talking and scheming, and basically the villain for this movie is Musburger. He's kind of I guess you could call him kind of the second in command, and becomes the sort of leading person within Hudsucker after this point. And so he's hatching this plan. Well, okay, the only way to make this up in the stock loss from the suicide of our owner and boss is to depress their stock so that it becomes very low and they can buy it back at a very low price and then regain control of the company. And so it's, this similar, you see stock buybacks and all these shady schemes now. So really, really no different. And again, being written in the 80s when the height of a lot of these lower taxes for companies from the Ronald Reagan administration. So it kind of fits in perfectly, even though it takes place in the 50s.
Yeah, and it takes place in the 50s, and it was filmed in the 80s, and really, what has changed,
Yeah, really, really nothing. So the next moment in the movie, which I thought is also a very interesting, and what ends up happening here is that Norville sees the advertisement in the paper, or he gravitates towards to the Hudsucker Industries to apply for a job, and he ends up getting a job in the mailroom, which you then see him in the mailroom getting this long lecture from presumably his boss or the head of the mailroom, which is this cavernous, massive entity with hundreds of people seemingly doing almost menial work of throwing letters and all kinds of things. So what did you think of that scene? It stuck out to me for sure.
Oh, man. And yeah, I just want to go back and he found Hudsucker Industries because of you brought up the coffee mug. It left a coffee stain around the ad for Hudsucker Industries. And I think that's like the theme of the whole movie. I think it's Ouroboros, the snake eating itself. But he describes the circle as like bringing people together.
Right.
But I think that's interesting. But back to the newsroom. Yeah, I wrote down one of the first quotations I wrote down was file a faulty complaint and they dock you. And that's basically what his new manager was telling him the entire time, like, anytime you take out to do anything, we're going to dock your pay. And I feel like a lot of Amazon workers across this country are feeling that right now.
And that's juxtaposition between that and then the people upstairs in that previous scene saying that they're loaded. These guys are all rich and loaded upstairs, and these guys down in the mailroom have to lose pay if they, have to go to the bathroom, going to Amazon.
It's a literal sweatshop. Is what it's being portrayed as. And I also wrote down, they take a moment to acknowledge that Warren Hudsucker had just jumped out the window. And when it comes over the loudspeaker, it's, "This moment has been duly noted on your time cards and will be deducted from your pay."
Yes. That was classic.
Just taking 30 seconds to acknowledge somebody's death is being deducted from pay.
Yeah.
And I don't think a hell of a lot's changed.
Obviously, Norville is now going to become a part of the upper echelon of the company. And to create that for that scene to occur, he receives this special blue envelope, which requires him to go upstairs to a high floor. He takes this blue letter all the way up to the top floor, or the 44th floor, to give it to, the villain of the movie, Sidney Musburger, played by Paul Newman. A great character in the movie, really a good villainous person. And so he goes up there, and then this is where he is showing and trying to give him the letter. And I don't know, maybe you want to walk through when he gets into this office, because I know you mentioned, describing the office for Musburger.
Oh, once you see Sydney's office, that's what I like. That's what it gravitated me towards this film so much. Like, it's very of its time. The special effects are very 90s. It was in a kind of a weird time where they were still trying to figure out special effects, but like the sets and the aesthetics, like, they sum up a character so well. So when you go into Sidney Musburger's office, you can see the outline of the giant clock outside Hudsucker Industries, which is another theme for the movie. But right underneath the clock there, the tagline for Hudsucker Industries is "The future is now," which I think that's interesting as well. But when you walk into Sidney's office, there's nothing. There's one window you can see the outline of the clock, and a desk. Simple, foreboding, villainous, very much, I felt, was resembling straight up fascism.
I found it very much like the perfect setting for a villain, the guy who doesn't need anything because all he has is his desk where he's working on, important contracts. And so he doesn't actually end up giving him the blue envelope, which we don't really realize at the time, or maybe it's not obvious. And so we're now witnessing Norville's character trying to, just show him his idea that he had created, and he pulls out this circle, which maybe you could also go back to the circle around the coffee mug as well. And he's saying, this is an idea. And at first you don't really know what it is. It just looks like a circle and you're kind of confused. And he says, he doesn't really go along with it, and somehow he ends up messing up one of the pages of this important contract, and then the contract blows out the window, and it gives Musburger this idea, this guy is kind of an idiot. Maybe we can name him as the president of the company, which will tank the stock and do as intended. So it kind of sets up this, this guy from the mailroom getting his play in the very top, where he thinks he's getting it perhaps because of his circle idea, or this picture he's showing him, when in fact it's this evil hatch plan.
Right. And yeah, somehow a lot of the plans get started on fire because Norville is just a clumsy individual. But it starts on fire, and Musburger tries to save some of the documents, and he ends up falling out the window, and Norville saves him. And I think the movie has these really interesting cutscenes so it goes to a cutscene of a tailor asking if Musburger wants double stitch. And he said, no, you're just doing double stitch to pad your pockets. So that kind of tells you his character right there. He's not out for anybody else except himself. I mean, he's a businessman. It's ruthless. But anyways, Norville's holding onto his pants as he's, dangling from his death. And it cuts back to the scene where the tailor takes it upon himself to give him a double stitch. And he specifically says, Mr. Musburger's a nice guy. I'm just going to give him a double stitch. I like those little cutscenes in this film where it kind of like, it humanizes characters that really are only in the film for like maybe 2 minutes, if that.
Yeah, and I think that, and it turns out the double stitch is what saves his life, in addition to Norville pulling him up.
Right.
I forgot about that scene. I think the way that if I'm not mistaken, the page gets on fire, perhaps because of his cigar, which is one other thing you notice throughout this movie, and maybe it's very 50s, is that every one of the wealthy people is always smoking a cigar constantly throughout the whole movie. The journalists we see later, all of the executives, just cigar, cigar, cigar.
And also that, it was a sign of affluence of the time, so it makes sense. But also every theme of this film circles back to like a circle shape, and we'll get more into that.
Yeah, that's true. There is lots of the circle imagery. So we kind of get to this point where now they've hired him, or they brought him on as the president of the company, and now we kind of switch gears to the female character in the movie, Amy Archer, who's a journalist, who's played by Jennifer Jason Leigh. And so we're at the office of a paper. They say what it is, but it's not too important, the equivalent of like the New York Post or something like that. And they're trying to find information out about Norville to see how they can, write an article on him, because he's kind of this no-name guy who's now running Hudsucker Industries, this huge corporation. And I thought that there were some interesting kind of jokes and things going on at the newspaper office. And yeah, so I don't know if you had any comments about the portion where they're kind of discussing what to do and trying to get more information about about Norville from the reporter's perspective.
Oh, it's super interesting. Nobody seems to be too interested in the story. And also, Norville, they choose Norville because they're making him the proxy, or a mark, or an imbecile, and that's another thing I want to bring up, because you see it in the newsroom there. It's full of misogyny. It's full of ableism. This entire film is, you can see it, because I think when Amy Archer comes in the office, two gentlemen or two other news reporters are making bets on if she'll bring up her Pulitzer Prize. And it's very of its time and very misogynist.
Those are all totally true. Actually, the one line that I wrote down is that the editor is kind of yelling at the different reporters, and one of them says, or the editor then says to one of the reporters, that this story will be, quote, better than your pieces on the commie grain surplus, which I thought was kind of a throwaway line, but it's kind of a funny one to have in there if you think about the year 1958.
Right, and considering everything that was happening.
I mean, clearly that's not the focus of the movie, but they do a good job throughout the movie of fitting in little bits that kind of the atmosphere of the time. So at this point, once we have Amy is now, it seems like she wants to take it upon herself to get the story, because that's kind of her. She's very motivated to get the story. And so what we end up seeing her do is go to Hudsucker Industries to kind of infiltrate and see if she can kind of, seduce or get information about this guy Norville, because they just don't have anything. And in time when they go there, I believe in the very first scene that they meet each other, Norville ends up showing him this circle, again, the circle, a picture of a circle. And what he's saying is like, it's for the kids. And still you don't know what this is means, especially I hadn't seen the movie yet, so I didn't really know. And I guess I hadn't looked at the cover of the movie, which makes it obvious what it was. But you don't know yet. And so now he's you see her maybe as a dishonorable journalist, as in at first you maybe see her as this Pulitzer Prize winner, but really she's kind of doing something that's pretty, kind of despicable, to sneak into his office and steal information. And so I don't know how you thought about that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And she's trying to gain a way into his, just his personal ideas and thoughts, because she claims she's from Muncie, or went to college at Muncie, which is his hometown. So then obviously there's a connection there from the start. She's being very deceptive, very deceiving, and gathering intel and trying to figure out why Hudsucker Industries would, put this guy in position. And yes, he shows her the circle, and I wrote down the quote, it connects everybody, but spatially. And I thought that was really, and then he says, it's for kids. But I thought that line in particular was very interesting.
Yeah, I remember the quote, and it's kind of, obviously, again, you kind of learn what that means. And I think they allude to it again later on once we learn what this circle means. But again, everything does, just like the movie all kind of goes in a circle as far as the beginning to the end. So it's a good metaphor throughout. So at this point now, she's kind of convinced Norville that she's just a, regular old person. And now we see her kind of sneak through this clock room, where this ominous mechanical room where this giant clock on the building is. And she ends up kind of seeing what's going on the other end. And this is, the office of Musburger kind of chatting, and she overhears something going on the other side where, maybe this is some information that I need to know. And I think at this point is when she learns that he's what they're doing, at least in very general terms. And then Moses, who's the kind of the clock administrator or caretaker, kind of has this very interesting conversation with her about her life being, miserable. And I think the quote I wrote down, she says, she said, "I'm happy enough," but you could obviously tell that she's not. And so I think this movie also, throughout, lots of people who aren't really very happy, including Hudsucker, he commits suicide. There's a sense of everyone being happy, but it's all kind of a facade.
Yeah, absolutely. And Moses is also the narrator of the film as well. And yeah, I wrote down a quotation that he said at the beginning of the movie that was, right now, this is it. I got it. Of course, by then it'll be past, but they're all happy. Of course, there's a few lost souls out there. And I thought that was interesting as well.
Yeah, that plays right into that idea that, the people are, some people are happy, but, others might just be pretending to be. It's kind of they're working for this big corporation, but really are they happy in what they're doing?
And a lot of the, throughout the film, a lot of the people that work at Hudsucker are there over the holidays.
Yes, that's true.
They're not spending time with their family. They're not actually pursuing their passions. It's all about money. It's all about production.
Exactly. And then that kind of actually is a perfect segue to another short scene, but very kind of fits with the whole with the whole kind of aesthetic of the movie. Is there's this very big party that Norville has to go to and be introduced to all the big stockholders who own Hudsucker stock. And so he's going to the scene, he's being dragged through to talk to different people by Musburger. And, he's very uncomfortable. He constantly is, making the other stockholders upset. One of them punches him in the face, because he doesn't say what he wants to hear. And he's kind of concerned by it again. And so we then see the very end of the scene, which is very ridiculous and grand, and the party is very expensive, and you can just see they're just throwing their money around for all these shareholders. And then you have the scene with Amy and Norville outside with one of the best visual scenes maybe in the movie, where they have this overlooking dreary scene of New York City. Like, all the scenes are very dark, which I think maybe also plays into the movie. Everything is very dark. Then they have a kiss scene at that moment where it kind of seems like Amy is maybe falling for him a bit, and kind of regrets the things that she's doing that are dishonorable. So I don't know what you thought about that scene in general. Any other comments?
I did write down a quotation that Archer said that everybody looks like ants. Because they're up on top of the, like a fancy skyscraper. And yeah, everybody looks from ants up here. And that's when she almost lets it slip at this point, because she says, I go to this beatnik bar, which this is, late 50s, that serves no alcohol, just juice and smoothies and stuff like that. And she says, you'd fit in right in. I go every New Year's. And he's like, oh, well, is it a new tradition? Because I thought you were from
right. And he kind of being a little bit, he's easily convinced when someone, maybe is lying to him. And so she, again, I think that might play also into his being from this small town where he just assumes everyone is being the best self, when he doesn't realize that in New York City, they're just there to do whatever it takes to get to the top.
Right.
This is probably maybe midway through, a little past. And this is where we see that Norville now is telling the board about his idea, which is, as we learn now, is the hula hoop. This is the circle he's been showing the whole time. And he's talking about how it's, reinvented the wheel. And they're now saying, okay, we don't want to make this. This would be a huge failure. But then they think, oh, well, maybe we'll make this and it'll be a flop, and it'll again help us with our goal. So they green light the idea. It's very funny, this whole scene. They're going through the marketing and all this stuff. I don't know. I found that scene very maybe it's not supposed to be funny, but I found it very funny.
Oh, when they're trying to come up with a name, and it's all meant to be satire, but eventually it's a flop. right away. A bunch of store owners, I assume, I don't know. The stores that are selling them, you never really know what they're selling. I think they might just be general stores. Of course, this is in the 50s. Nobody had Amazon or anything like that, but it looked like there's bikes in the windows and everything. They just keep continually dropping the price of the hula hoop or the Hudsucker. They were trying to come up with a billion different names for this thing, came up with the hula hoop. Eventually, he just throws them in the alley, and that's when goes down the street, and a kid picks it up and starts hula hooping in the street. And school gets let out, and all of these kids see this kid hula hooping. They rush to the store. And I thought it was interesting, like right away after that, it went from like, just purchase anything in the store, we'll give you one of these things, to raising the price, like triple the amount from what it was originally supposed to be sold.
Yep, I noticed that too. They kept lowering it, and then they went from $1.79 to $3.79 or something. And now all of a sudden, the hula hoop like captures America. Everyone is now. It's like the one thing in the beginning where you have the mailroom as these working class folks, and then the rich people at the top. But the hula hoop brings seemingly everyone together of any, age, social status. You have the president gives him a call, Eisenhower at the time, to congratulate him on it. It's a very...
Yeah, I wrote that down too. Eisenhower calls him and says, you're a good American.
Yes, because he's created something that lots of people, I guess, seemingly don't need, but everyone loves.
Pretty much the epitome
exactly,
of capitalism, right?
Creating something. I mean, I guess you could say at this time, it's a toy for kids, a very cheap toy. Seemingly, it's just a round piece of plastic. And actually, one of my favorite names, just as to say it, that they called it was the extruded plastic dingus. I thought that was one of the funny names they call it at the beginning. Yeah. So then because of the popularity of it, the stock for Hudsucker now is skyrocketing. It's going up and up because everyone wants to buy this cheap thing that's costing them nothing, but they're making a lot of money off it. And they get back to the boardroom and they're talking about how they're not going to be able to make any money or buy the stock back because of all it. And I think at one point they even joke about how they're going to, if they had sold or they hadn't sold all their stock before, they all would have been millionaires.
Right. And that's when one of the characters, which his facial expressions
and eyebrows too, if you remember,
insane. Absolutely. But I wrote down his quote. So at this point, they dumped all their stock because they're hoping to buy it back cheaply. But as you said, they'd all be millionaires if they would have kept the stock. And he gets up on the table like Warren Hudsucker at the beginning, and I quote, "I'm getting off this merry-go-round," and tries to jump out the window, but Sidney Musburger has replaced it with a, higher grade plexiglass.
Yeah, he's like, we're only going to allow one person to do that. But yeah, that is a good line, and it kind of shows the venture capital or these gigantic financial institutions are this game almost.
Right. It really shows people that all of your self needs and what you need to do to take care of yourself, when you're in a position like that, it's all gone out the window. You're not taking care of your personal health. It's very bad for your mental health. Let's just say that.
So here, I think this is also a situation now. So one thing I didn't mention is that Amy ends up getting a job as a receptionist for Norville at the company. So she's now able to keep a constant eye on him. But right. She then kind of bursts into his office when she finds out that they're going to lay off 80% of the company. So now the company is doing so well from this hula hoop, and they're in trouble. They need to dump it and make it go down. So they decide they're going to lay off 80% of the company. And, he's sitting in this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Norville is sitting now. He's now kind of adopted this wealthy businessman type of stature because he's the president of the company. He's sitting in there in this gigantic office while he's having a bust of his head being made and carved out of stone while an orchestra is playing, smoking a cigar. And Amy kind of bursts in and just kind of, how can you be doing all this? This is not the person that I originally met or maybe fell for. And that scene is just, everything is over the top.
Right. And he's getting like a
yes,
a head massage. his hair's all slicked back now, like looks like, Wolf of Wall Street type. And like, this is not like, where is the Norval I knew that came up with the hula hoop? Like, where's your ideas? You're just in here, like, basically assimilating. Not only that, like, just at the beginning, just being like openly, like, willing to have conversations with just the elevator man, which is another thing that'll come into play. But like, just everybody just having casual conversations. And it went from that to like, oh yeah, I knew we were going to lay off 80% of the company because I signed off on it. And I wrote that down as a quote because Amy Archer was thinking he didn't know anything about it. Well, yeah, he signed
exactly.
off.
And the good point, the next thing I was going to mention was the elevator guy, who's very chatty when he's in the elevator. And the elevator guy comes in with his own idea, which is basically first he shows him a circle again, the circle image. And it turns out to be a straw that can bend so you can drink your drink, not having to be above it. And he pans the idea. Norville says it's terrible, and he ends up firing him as he like begging him at his feet not to fire him. He does so anyway, which ends up kind of coming back to bite him. So you can really see he's kind of taken on this, sub-villain role in the movie.
Yeah, I like how you said that it's the bendable straw is another circle, but it also brings something to you. It bends, away from the cup and to you. I thought that was interesting too. But he also, it's, he, blows it off like, no, this is a waste of time, waste of energy. After this elevator man, since the beginning of the movie, has been calling him buddy, just trying to be really inviting and, didn't have to take it upon himself to fire this guy, but did so out of, a power trip.
And so here we kind of getting to the kind of the last, third or less of the movie. So now, he's kind of taken on Norval as being this kind of posturing as this big shot. And so the next scene is another instance with the board meeting, and they're deciding how they're going to get rid of Norval now that he's doing too well in his role and succeeding. And so they kind of create this narrative where he's this crazy person and they're going to fire him after New Year's Eve, brand him as crazy, send him out to the nut house basically so that they can, just rid themselves. And by saying he's crazy, it allows them to kind of dishonor all the stuff. And hopefully then the stock also will drop again so they can, they're constantly catching up different schemes to game their company.
Right. And the ominous clock tender, because there's two of them. There's Moses, the narrator, and another very ominous individual. He actually works with the elevator guy and sends a story to the Archer, yes. I believe it is. Isn't it? And, defames Norval, says the idea was stolen. He didn't come up with the hula hoop. And that's when they, start to investigate or try to frame it that he is crazy or, not mentally all there.
Yep. They're basically, they're kind of, they're leaking things to the press that aren't true so they can help, promote this story so that it all kind of falls together. And, so we kind of see this. And then, I think what ends up happening in this, right after this, you see Norval, this is now getting to New Year's Eve again. He's at a bar. He ends up going to this juice bar that Amy had mentioned, and he desperately wants a martini, but they don't sell alcohol. And so the bartender keeps saying, no, this is a juice bar. And Amy ends up coming in, trying to help him, give him, this, but he doesn't want her help. He ends up, leaving and running away. And a very funny scene, another, very good satire where he's running around and he encounters a bunch of other people. And now they have read stories about how he's this fraud and, he doesn't deserve anyone's respect and they're chasing him.
But also, I wrote down that when they were running through the alleys, when the crowd and the elevator guy were chasing Norval, they pass a homeless gentleman. And I think 3 times he continues to say, out with the old, in with the new. This is New Year's Eve, mind you. And I thought that was super interesting as well.
It's kind of, again, I feel like it's doing that like juxtaposition of this, the very wealthy and then the bottom, the have-nots, the literal homeless people.
Right. Yeah. And it was almost joyful though, like out with the old, in with the new, but also you have, at this point has nothing left, goes to his old office, this is where the ominous guy is already scraping off his name, on the door. And he goes to the closet, and the only thing in the closet is his apron that he wore when he was working in the mailroom. And he walks out onto the windowsill and is ready to jump. So you have Norval that is ready to commit suicide all the way up top, like one of the biggest skyscrapers in New York City. And you have a homeless gentleman that's, out with the old, in with the new.
Interesting. Yeah, that's kind of a good way to say it too. That it's almost like a prelude, the homeless man's kind of statement.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I hadn't caught that kind of mixed message, and so he's out on the front. We can see Musburger, and then in his office plotting to take over. I believe this person you've been talking about, this shady, ominous person, ends up locking the window, so he's locked outside. He has no way to get back in. He ends up falling, and as he's falling, which is also a really cool way they have him kind of falling down. They make it seem very high up, this giant skyscraper, and as he's going down, you just assume that's it, and then he stops midair, and you see that Moses had put a broom in the clock, and this clock literally had stopped time for everyone except for Norville, who's kind of floated in like suspended animation, and he's floating there, and you're kind of not sure what's going to happen. And then the angel or ghost, whatever you want to call it, of Mr. Hudsucker comes in and starts talking to him and kind of bringing the whole movie together. And this is where he finds, in the apron you mentioned that he's wearing from when he was in the mailroom, is this blue letter he was originally supposed to deliver at the very outset when he got the job. And we learned that the blue letter is this note from Mr. Hudsucker kind of regretting his life, another kind of full circle moment where to say sorry and to be regretful for all the things he'd done. And he was going to give all of his stock options to the person who took over. And in this case, it's Norville.
Right. Yeah. It says to anyone they make president, which was Norville.
Right, which I think he assumed, Hudsucker assumed it was going to be Musburger because he was kind of next in line. And I think he maybe seemed kind of joyed, and maybe perhaps why, he gets saved is that he is actually a good person, whereas Musburger is not.
I wrote down that quote, and yeah, I should say that Warren Hudsucker, he comes down as an angel. And also, I thought it was interesting, he points up to the halo, and he's like, yeah, we're all wearing these up here. I think it's just a fad. But it was also, it's also another circle. So the whole film, the theme is circles. He specifically says, I've, as you said, messed things up. Actually, he was romantically involved with Sid Musburger's
yes.
wife, you find out. Yeah, basically just trying to make amends and right a few wrongs, even if it's from the grave.
Then there's kind of a little bit of a fight within Moses in the clock room. He ends up kind of having the broom gets pulled out again, and then we end up seeing it stops again where Norville is now stopped right before the bottom, the street, and ends up falling obviously completely fine. And I thought that I feel like I wrote down as kind of the constantly falling from the suicide from Hudsucker, and in this case I wrote down that it's kind of like a metaphor for sort of falling in business, where you have, you can reach these high heights of your company, and then in a flash, your company could just be worthless. And, again, kind of the nature of capitalism, where, you can have this big tech company worth millions, and then all of a sudden it's worth nothing. Or you have a penny stock that goes up, GameStop or any of these other things, and then all of a sudden it's just gone again.
Yeah.
Again,
right.
Circle.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yes. Yep.
And so I guess the very end here, we have, it turns out that Musburger ends up being taken off to the loony bin. So he ends up, getting what happens to him is, what he wanted to do to Norville. So again, you can almost call that again like a circle of how things end up happening. And, it seems to end up being like a somewhat of a happy ending, where the person taking over the company is actually a good person and he could have more ideas. And then you see in the very final scene of the movie, he's now inventing the Frisbee, another circle thing, another toy for kids that will bring people together. And then the movie concludes. So my thoughts on the movie just overall, I very much enjoyed it. I thought, again, it was lots of great commentary on the business and all of those kinds of pieces we've talked about. And it really did, again, like you said, all came full circle of the movie. So I don't know if you had any last thoughts on it, anything.
Yeah, it's very much the rise and falls of capitalism, basically. Sometimes very much things might be going your way, but as this system shows time and time again. It's not sustainable.
Exactly. Yeah. And, all the things that the company was doing is really not any dissimilar from what actual companies are doing. And nothing has changed from 1958 when the movie takes place, when the movie was made in the 80s, 90s. Nothing has really become different except for the fact that now the stakes are so much higher and you have complete economic collapses, victims to these things too, which they don't really show in the movie. There isn't too many victims except perhaps the wealthy. That's one thing I noticed.
Right. And I wrote down at least 4 people in this movie attempted suicide. It came down to their bottom dollar, whether they were going to be rich or not. But yeah, I think I don't know. Like I said, I haven't seen this in probably about 5 or 6 years, but I think it holds up. It very much is a 90s movie.
Yes. Yeah. Generally the imagery of the movie, again, I found that like any of the scenes that were outside always tended to be, with the exception of the very beginning, were always at night when it was dark and very ominous. Whereas inside everything was very bright. They had these fancy, gigantic rooms where they were always inside the party and all that. So it was always this kind of like dark and light that I enjoyed too.
It was always dark and it was always very empty. Like just nothing. A lot of the offices, just a desk in this giant mammoth room.
Yeah, it's almost like the emptiness of their lives in a way, that they don't really have any possessions.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But I want to thank you, Cole, for joining me to talk about it here on Left the Projector.
Oh, well, man, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah, I had a great time. So anyone who wants to check out the episode, you can do so at leftoftheprojector.buzzsprout.com, as well as downloading on any of the other podcast platforms out there. And hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week.